Thanks, everyone. So my name is Devin Finzer. I am the CEO and co-founder of OpenSea. And I'll be talking a little bit about some of the new projects that we're launching at OpenSea with a theme around how we build trust with our users and our community by building out open infrastructure. So as a little bit of background, at OpenSea, we're really excited about taking a broad lens to crypto and Web3 and thinking about not just this as a pure financial technology, but really thinking about it from the lens of social networks and changing how platforms operate. So today, platforms like social networks and commerce platforms have traditionally been very closed, permissioned ecosystems. And this is OK. I think there are a lot of vibrant closed ecosystems, but they do tend to have pretty significant limitations. So closed ecosystems tend to have major gatekeeping problems. And they also tend to have limited innovation, right? The innovation is very much limited by how much the platform itself can develop and innovate. And all of that is centralized under a single platform. So at OpenSea, we're really excited about kind of pioneering a new model for how we build platforms. And instead of permissioned, centralized platforms, instead we're building out open, decentralized ecosystems where OpenSea can play a really important role in building out the foundational infrastructure for those ecosystems. But ultimately, those are really open to developers to do anything they want with them. In OpenSea, our approach is we build best-in-class applications on top of that infrastructure, but we don't control the infrastructure, right? And so this is kind of a new model that I think is going to be really powerful for Web3 as we move forward. But it's really, it's in its infancy. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about some more specifics about the sorts of things that we're building more concretely. So the three products that I'm going to talk about are the three open protocols and standards that I'll talk about today. The first is Seaport, which is the marketplace protocol that powers all of the activity that you see today on OpenSea. The second is Seadrop, which is a new open protocol that we've just started launching out there around primary drops. And then the third is Open Rarity, which is really a standard around the metadata and how we think about the rarity and value of NFTs in the ecosystem. Cool. So the first product that I'll talk about is Seaport. So Seaport we recently launched this summer, and it's an open source, decentralized marketplace protocol built specifically for NFTs. And what's exciting about this is we really built Seaport in a very open, generic way. OpenSea actually isn't the owner of Seaport, and any developer can build an NFT marketplace on top of Seaport. And of course, excitingly, we introduced a lot of new features and improvements to how decentralized marketplaces work. So for example, Seaport reduces the gas costs significantly for NFT purchases. Secondly, it enables functionality like collection-level offers or trait-based offers. And we also eliminated a lot of the really expensive initialization fees that were present in previous versions of the smart contracts that we use for OpenSea. You can also create shared liquidity pools on Seaport. So of course, there's the liquidity pool represented by the OpenSea marketplace, but we've also had new marketplaces spring up, creating their own liquidity pool. So examples of these include ENS Vision, which is an Ethereum name service specific marketplace that really builds out a custom UI for ENS. Additionally, there's Quixotic on Optimism, and then Stratos, which is an Arbitrum NFT marketplace, all built on Seaport. The more recent innovation that we've launched is called Seadrop. And Seadrop is really the primary launch counterpart to Seaport. So who here has ever minted an NFT or purchased an NFT on the primary market? So you may know that the initial launch of NFT projects is very distributed, right? So there's lots of different websites out there. There's lots of different ways that developers will build out their initial launch. And this is great because that means there's a lot of innovation in the space, but it also means that there's not a standard set of primitives that both users and developers can really rely on to ensure that their initial launch goes smoothly and that they do it in a trusted way. And so Seadrop is actually an open version of a set of contracts that allow people to build primary drops on top of blockchains. And in the first instance, we're launching this on Ethereum. It also comes out of the box with a number of really interesting benefits. So, for example, a lot of NFT projects these days want to manage allow lists for their initial users so that they can distribute NFTs to the people who are most devoted to the project. And so Seadrop actually allows developers and creators to manage those allow lists in a decentralized way using IPFS. And of course, it comes with advanced and more advanced as we innovate on top of it, minting functionality, and of course, a landing page on OpenSea where people can customize and really tell their story about why they're launching the NFT, why it's exciting. So giving creators a much more robust tool set to launch their NFT projects. The last initiative that I want to talk about is called Open Rarity. So rarity is a really interesting problem in the NFT space, particularly as we explore this first use case for NFTs around collectibles and art. And the challenge is, there's the NFT, there's the data associated with it, there's all of the unique attributes that really make it special. And the question is, well, as a collector, how do you figure out how rare an item really is, right? And so there's all of these websites out there that will rank and sort things by proprietary rarity, and typically that's done in sort of a closed way and can often vary across different websites. So what we decided to do was we said, OK, instead of just building our own rarity ranking algorithm and kind of keeping it completely opaque to the ecosystem, let's actually build this out in the open with a couple of partners. So we worked with a number of partners in the NFT space. We started talking to NFT projects, and then we ended up building an open standard for rarity that publishes out on GitHub how one can actually calculate the rarity of an NFT, both depending on its attributes and then depending on the other NFTs in the collection. And we really got the whole community to be excited about unifying this across different platforms. And so this week, we announced that we're launching Open Rarity on the OpenSea website with a couple of pilot collections. And there are a number of other projects that will be supporting Open Rarity. And I think this is a really good example of a new model for building applications, right? So instead of going and building things in a closed, centralized way, rather figuring out what are areas where we can sort of work with the community, be a first mover, and really push things forward and advance the entire space. And then excitingly, we're doing this on all sorts of chains. So OpenSea was born on Ethereum. That's where we got our start. But we're really excited about a multi-chain future, and we're particularly excited about scaling solutions on top of Ethereum. So today we announced, or we actually shipped, our Arbitrum integration. And so now you can buy and sell Arbitrum NFTs directly on OpenSea, which is really exciting. And we'll be launching a number of chains. We're doing sort of a rolling thunder rollout of several new chains over the coming weeks. So stay tuned for that. So that concludes the talk. And I sort of in conclusion, I think we're all here because we believe in Web3, and we believe that it can really transform the internet and society in really big ways. So what we're trying to do at OpenSea is really build trust, ecosystem accountability, and foundational infrastructure that will unlock kind of the next generation of applications in Web3. So there's a lot we're doing. We're also excited about working with projects in the ecosystem. So always happy to chat with folks about how we can be more helpful for your NFT project. So thank you so much, and I'll bring up Ryan to the stage for the chat. Thanks all.
No,
oh.
You were right. You were right.
Good to see you, man. Where are you? Oh, I'm over here. Cool.
I don't make the rules. I just go where I'm told. So, all right. Exciting presentation.
Thanks.
Let's cut to the chase, though. Are NFTs dead?
Definitely not. I think they're here to stay.
Seriously, I mean, I personally don't think that they're dead. I'm obviously being facetious. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
I've made the comparison to like 2013 Bitcoin, where I feel like the next couple of years are going to be deep in the kind of no man's land for NFTs, where the infrastructure is going to have some time to season, and then we'll see what are some actual novel, interesting use cases outside of PFPs, and like how do the digital artists start to differentiate themselves a little bit more. There's definitely a ton of interesting experimentation, but am I wrong? Do you think it's going to be shallower? Do you think we're just kind of getting started because this is a new type of asset and it's not necessarily, at least on an individual basis, as cyclical, because you'll still have interesting art collections, you'll still have interesting kind of like one-offs that drop that aren't just like market beta where everything's going to take a dive like you see in the fungible space?
Yeah. So I do think that actually, in fact, I would say that to some degree the data has proven that NFTs are, in some circumstances, much less cyclical than other areas of crypto. It'd be interesting to do sort of a rigorous analysis of market movements versus NFT movements. But I mean, I think the sort of theory, right, is, and which I do think will bear out, is that NFTs just sort of have use cases in society as a whole, right? And the one we're excited about in particular is gaming, right? Where one interesting thing is if you look at NFT volume over time, certainly there's been a decline in the winter, but if you look at NFT transaction counts, not nearly as steep of a decline, right? And so, in fact, you're sort of seeing a lot of interest and excitement just at a lower price point, and potentially, economies that aren't as crazy as what you see with Bored Apes, but rather sort of the underpinnings of, for example, a healthy game economy where each item is maybe 50 cents or $1, and you can start to do that on layer 2s and other blockchains as well. So I think we really are starting to see that. It just doesn't always play out in kind of the volume numbers, right? It more plays out when you dig deeper into the data and when you see all of the investments that are being made in various categories, gaming, ticketing, music. All of these things take time to mature, but I'm really confident that we'll see just a Cambrian explosion of innovation over the next couple years. And of course, it'll take time, but we definitely see the foundations being built for sure.
There was like an 18-month clip where you were putting out 4-alarm fires every 2 to 3 weeks. Do you feel like is the silver lining that things have slowed down a little bit, that is now down to every 6 weeks, or what's the cadence? Because you got a lot of good stuff going on. Obviously, the hyperscale that you grew and that NFTs grew kind of introduced you to some of these very unique challenges that are specific to the NFT market in terms of IP rights. How do you deal with thefts? How do you deal with phishing? Right? Like, some of them are not unique to crypto, but these types of assets, it's a little bit different than the fungible assets. But how do you think you all have navigated more recently? Do you feel like you're kind of like caught up a little bit, and now you can get into build mode?
Certainly, I think we have caught up. So we've had a unique journey in that we started out very small. So we were a small company, and the NFT, what I think probably the most surprising part of this journey was just how quickly things took off, right? It was really, there was this one day in 2020 when we started doing, 10 to 20x higher volume than the previous day. And from that day onward, it was just continued exponential growth, right? And so we entered firefighting mode. We really scaled the company to handle this. We started solving a lot of the problems that came up as you hit the next level of scale. And now I'm really proud to say, over the last 2 months, we've really started hitting our stride as a company. So if you look at our Twitter feed and you look at sort of the number of features that we're launching, open rarity, Seaport, internationalization, multi-chain, all of these things are really coming together. And we've really had the luxury of just being in a really exciting space that attracts the highest of caliber talent, and then sort of incubating and growing and investing in that talent during a period that was quite stressful and involved a lot of firefighting. But now that we're in a sort of more stable period, a lot of that talent is really gelled, and we're starting to ship some really awesome stuff. So I definitely stay tuned over the next weeks and months to see some really exciting developments.
I always try to stay away from asking people about competitors because there's always like diplomatic, answers to it, and I really care more about the answer around it, which is like, what is the full landscape of like the market-leading services that you think about on a day-to-day basis? So maybe they're competitors in like the long term, but really like they're just taking a different tack towards solving some of the unique challenges in kind of the NFT market, whether it's market making or secure custody or whatever. Where do you think the landscape's going to look in the next couple of years? We get through this period of consolidation. Who are the market leaders? Where are you guys really strong, and where are some of the other players? Because you've kind of gone through, I'd say NFT marketplaces right now are kind of where centralized exchanges were, like 4 years ago, where you have a couple of like big Western brands. You've got a couple of decentralized protocols that are trying to use token incentives to juice their numbers. You've got some behemoth organizations. We're going to talk to Surrogate in a minute. I'm sure they're not done yet with NFTs. And I'm curious, as like you have the first mover advantage. You've got a lot of things right. You got these kind of new things coming out. But 2 years from now, what are the alternatives? Because you're not going to have 80% market share forever, right? Maybe you will. To your, I don't know. You're good, but that's a tall hill to climb just historically for any crypto company.
Yeah. So I think one trend that we'll see is so looking at it from a customer's perspective, I do think that there is benefit to a platform like OpenSea as a one-stop shop, right? And that's the reason that we've started expanding into things like primary drops, right? Where we can actually provide it is a little more of a centralized approach in the sense that we're providing end-to-end services on both just the marketplace services, but also the trust and safety side. So ensuring that a project can come to us, launch on OpenSea, have both a primary marketplace and a secondary marketplace, and ensure that there's not scam projects out there that are trying to imitate it. That's actually a much bigger problem in the space than I think some people realize. So I do think that there is going to be some sort of consolidation in the market around these sorts of like core marketplace services. That being said, one interesting trend we're seeing is just more verticalization. So music marketplaces or music platforms launching and really specifically focusing on music NFTs. So sound.xyz is a really great example. And these can often be, not hyper competitive with OpenSea, but rather symbiotic. Maybe there's a marketplace for music NFTs, but those bleed into the user base of OpenSea as well. Gaming, I think, is going to be really interesting too, because games do sometimes want to build their own kind of vertically integrated marketplaces inside of the game, and so that can bleed over, right? You can have a game launch their items and get started on OpenSea, but then maybe later on they build their own marketplace solution. So that's another trend we're seeing. But generally, I would say, it's such early days for the space that I really do think we're still in sort of a rising tide lifts all boats scenario. And if you zoom out, right, we're still in 1995 days for NFTs in terms of kind of the number of users in the entire space. And so we think that a lot of the applications and a lot of the use cases haven't been built yet. And we're always just trying to be like collaborative with other people in the space, and I think that's really unique, right? There's even with sort of our most direct competitors, we typically have an open line where we can talk to them about shared problems in the space, and it's a really Yeah, it's just a really like vibrant, fun community to be part of, and not one where maybe it's as cutthroat as the exchange world.
I'll phrase it a little bit separately and also ask like a
Sure.
tangential question, which is if you look at the pie chart of categories today,
Yeah.
how would you split the top 5? And then what does that look like in 2 years? Because the gaming companies haven't really come into the fold yet. And like you
Yeah.
said, they might want to vertically integrate. We started to see things like ENS and like identifiers and whatnot really kind of hit their stride and I think will continue to grow. Are PFP projects going to continue to dominate the way they have? I'm very skeptical, but who knows? So what does that split look like today? And your bird's eye view, kind of looking at some of the analytics, some of the trends, and just some of the new experiments, where do you think the puck is going after we consolidate?
Well, I will say one of the challenging things has been predicting the future of what are the killer use cases, right? So for example, back in 2018 when NFTs were first coming off, we did think it would be gaming back then because CryptoKitties was the first use case, and that was where a lot of the activity was. And then this idea of a pure collectible profile picture really captured kind of the crypto ecosystem's imagination, and that frankly surprised us. So it's quite possible that things like profile pictures, will actually have another wave of excitement. But yeah, if you break down the pie chart today, collectibles are certainly up there. Generative digital art is pretty popular. There are, and I think it depends if you break the pie chart by volume or by number of transactions, right? If you look at gaming right now, there are games that are starting to take off and have a really high number of transactions. They're just still kind of building up their ecosystems. And then, of course, you have domain names, things like ENS, and more identity-related things. I do think, over the next couple of years, we'll start to see gaming emerge as a bigger and bigger segment of NFTs. Particularly because the gaming market itself is quite large, right? And there's already this user base of people who are used to buying digital items. I think there will be a little bit of a challenge around the community. Gamer sentiment towards NFTs right now is not the most positive, but ultimately I think people will realize that these aren't, these are actually just digital items that you can own and buy and sell in a completely new way. And if you think about this idea of a game economy today, it's this very complicated, entirely centrally controlled economy. What if you could open that up and have an open free market with much more entrepreneurial activity and just a lot more vibrant of an economy?
You never mention financial assets, real estate titles, insurance products. I mean, I feel like in bear markets past, people have really played up like the real world, kind of financial. Oh well, like we're out of the toy stage and we're going to do X, Y, Z. Is that going to be like at all in a focus, even if it's just for like experimentation purposes to get into some of these other assets? Because NFTs are just a data wrapper.
Right.
NFTs, as they're kind of known right now, are more of like a consumer good. But do you think that you'll gravitate more towards like the financial side of things, or do you think that that's a market that you ultimately stay away from, either for regulatory reasons or because you want to have this consumer first brand and focus on like the more mainstream apps?
Yeah, in the near term, I would say we're not focused on that. We haven't seen a lot of activity there, real usage on sort of more financial assets related to NFTs, and so we're and potentially it may be better served by other platforms that really want to dig in. That being said, you did remind me of, I think, a thing that we are excited about when you mentioned this kind of real-world use case, physical items represented as NFTs, right? So there's now this whole category of NFTs called redeemables, right? And there's many different ways you can kind of...
if you destroy the diamond, you still have the diamond.
Exactly, yeah. So like the idea is that you have a central custodian of a physical item, whether it's diamond or whatnot, and then you can issue an NFT representing that, buy and sell it many different times on all sorts of open marketplaces, and then redeem it for the physical item. And that could be, a pair of sneakers or whatever you really want. And this is an area where we're starting to see NFT projects play around with that, right? And I do think that category itself, that's an area where we're excited about, and we'll continue to kind of foster the ecosystem.
So out of the 3 things you announced today, so we had Seed Drop, Seaport, and Open Rarity.
Yeah.
And the risk of asking you to name your favorite child, like where are you going to be personally spending the most time? What do you think is the most structurally important thing to get right? Because some of these, seem like table stakes, but others, are potentially going to be the backbone for the next generation of NFTs.
Yeah, so I would say, so Seaport, we've launched and is really just the foundation of our marketplace, right? It's essentially our open protocol customized specifically for the use case of NFTs. So personally, like I won't be investing as much time in sort of innovating there because it is pretty well established, and we have a really strong team that just kind of continues to iterate on the marketplace protocol and the marketplace functionality in the UI. Drop is a little more a brand new product, right? So we have not, we just announced our first primary drop this week, and we'll just be continuing to sort of evaluate and work with partners on what they want, right, from that product. So that's an area where I'll be digging in. And then the third area where I'll be spending a lot of my time, not specifically on open rarity, but on thinking through metadata standards for NFTs. And I think that's actually one of the most underrated and most exciting areas, is thinking about, okay, you have this NFT. Right now, it's really just, people call it a JPEG, right? It's just a JPEG. But it actually could represent anything. And if it represents anything, then perhaps it should be represented uniquely on OpenSea. If you have an event ticket, well, that event ticket should be redeemable, and like you should be able to go to an event and easily show it. And all marketplaces should sort of know that it's a ticket and know that this is the time it's happening. So how can we build better open standards to represent NFTs in a more rich way? And if you think about the gaming ecosystem, it's a similar problem where you want to have game items that can work in one game, but also move to another game, right? So those sorts of problems are very ecosystem-centric problems, and it's an area where I'm really passionate, and I'll be spending a lot of my time.
Do NFTs have enemies? Right, DeFi has enemies, Bitcoin has enemies, Layer 1s are all enemies with each other, right? Like, who is anti-NFT at this point? Because it almost seems like more of the big brands, more of like the establishment, if you will. They're like open arms thinking, how do we experiment with this? How do we kind of push it forward? Are there any challengers, or is it just, avoiding the perception that NFTs jump the shark, and maybe it becomes cringe because like there's one too many, knockoffs of beer.eth, which was maybe cool when Budweiser did it, but now it starts to feel like untrendy. Is that the risk here, that this just kind of goes into a period of fallow because it's perceived as more of a fad, or are there other kind of structural challenges that keep you up at night, aside from just the basic problems everybody knows needs to be solved around custody, marketplace fairness, and kind of the end-to-end issuance process?
I wouldn't say that there's any structural challenges that keep me up at night, and it's been interesting to see, even in the bear market, just how much excitement there is from brands and from traditional social networks, right? Twitter integrating NFTs, which is super cool and exciting. I'd say the main challenges are really just coordination challenges between different platforms and marketplaces. So, thinking through problems like, well, when you have a game item and it updates, how do you propagate that to the whole ecosystem so every marketplace knows it? Relatively simple things, and things that we can solve, just they do require building out open standards that everyone can kind of unify and collaborate around. But overall, I guess I've been pleasantly surprised that as we've entered this market, of course there is the sentiment from some of the mainstream media that this is a fad. We've never been super concerned about that type of talk. But when we talk,
I'm not talking about the media. I'm talking about the actual news user numbers. Do they lose interest because it becomes like cringy if you get enough corporates that are
interesting,
dropping their own projects?
That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, I think that's why I think when we work with brand partners, we really try to do it in sort of a Web3 forward way, right? Work both with the creators that exist in the ecosystem today, the Doodles, the Bored Apes of the world, and sort of have strong collaborations, as opposed to what we saw last, or maybe it was 2 years ago, with like Taco Bell NFTs just sort of being out there in the ether and not really necessarily having a strong touch point with the existing community. So yeah, I think there's ways to solve that. It's certainly a risk. It's not one that I would say keeps me up at night, though.
I'll give you the last word. What are people not talking about that they will be in 2 years?
In 2 years, I think NFT interoperability will become a much bigger thing. So particularly in gaming, really thinking.
Do you mean that between different kind of L1s and rollups, or you talk about between different
applications, right? So really making this a primitive that you can, like a richer primitive that you can take from, for example, one game into another game into a marketplace, and it can really like seamlessly operate between those surfaces. I think
you and Kyle Samani just really want your Bored Apes to enter the magical wizarding world of Harry Potter and produce fanfic, like he said before.
Yeah.
No, I think, yeah, look, you were early, right? It's been quite a ride, and you had a lot of battle scars to show for it the last 24 months. Nice to be able to build and see some of the releases that aren't driven by chaos and firefighting. So excited for the next phase of OpenSea, and glad you could make it with us again this year. Look forward to the next update next year.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.